Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with a card for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. So to start off with, I had a couple pieces of Arches cold press watercolor paper. They weren't quite big enough for this image, but that's okay. I wanted only part of the image anyway. The plan in my head when I was like thinking about this card was to have a couple of the stamped images and I would trim them off, which I don't often do. It just kind of, again, it depends on my mood, that sort of thing, but purposely using smaller pieces kind of encourages that. So anywho, I have the watercolor paper. I am inking up this image. This is from Simon's Thankful Flowers stamp set. This came out, goodness, couple years ago at least. I've done other videos using this image. I love this stamp set. I know I've used the stamp set a lot because I like using the sentiments as well in this set. That's why it's one of my faves. So anywho, it's still available. I'll have links. So I've got both my pieces here and I'm stamping them with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink and inking up and stamping them multiple times because, again, Arches watercolor paper has quite a bit of texture to it. And just like I said in my last video, if you really want to capture the texture of an image and you want to use good quality watercolor paper, you can use hot pressed watercolor paper because it has a much smoother finish. I just personally don't reach for my hot pressed watercolor paper ever. It's just different. The more you experiment with watercoloring, you start to kind of understand how different papers are, etc. So I just went with the cold press. I'm okay with not getting like a perfectly crisp image. So then for my watercoloring, I'm using my Mijello Mission Gold palette again, because it's just what I do. You know, once I like get on a phase with something, I'll keep using it until I jump to something else, like just like the dog from Up, you know, squirrel. So right now it's my Mijello Mission Gold palette. So I'm mixing a couple colors because this is for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. It's a very basic combo. It's like kind of an aqua color, green, gold. That's it, which I was like, ooh, you can't go wrong with that. So I mixed a couple colors as similarly as possible. With the Color Throwdown Challenge, we are not super specific. Like you don't have to be like the exact color of such and such. You know, it's just how it looks to you because of course different computer screens, etc. So basically it was like blue, green, gold. So that for me in some ways made it easier. Like I still mixed my colors to get them similar to what I was seeing on the screen, but also when I'm working with the color challenge, it just makes me think somewhat differently. You know, normally I wouldn't do all these flowers in blue. I would be tempted to do them in like rainbow colors, you know, or do pinks and purples. It's just habit. So anywho, the coloring was very simple. I super sped this up in editing, but it was again applying clean water with one brush and then picking up the watercolor and putting it down with a second brush. And that makes things just work better. And you're also not wasting, like, I'm not really worried about wasting watercolor because I've had this palette now for how many years and I have yet to refill it, because when you buy it, it's tubes of watercolor and then you put it in the palette. I did a video, goodness, how many years ago was that? Like 5, 6, 7 years ago, whenever it was, when I first got this palette. I haven't refilled it since. Not like I've used it like tons and tons, but you know what I mean? Anyway, I did all my watercoloring. I let everything dry. And then I put these images in my splat box and I'm splattering those two colors, the blue and the green, just on top of this. It just adds that extra texture and whatnot that I love. And then I want to add some white splatter, of course. So I'm just using my Avery Elle white ink spray. White Craft Paint Works. I've shown how many different types of white splatter. This is just the current favorite. So I poured out a bit of that just onto my palette, picked it up with a brush, splattered that as well. The other splatter wasn't fully dry, so in some spots they'll mix and do their thing. That's great. I'm all for it. So I did all that, set those aside. For my background, again, I'm using the thank you text background stamp. It's another thing I'm currently obsessed with. And I've inked it up with Simon's Fossil ink. Last time I think I used Fog ink, which is just a really perfect like light gray. Fossil is like a warm gray is kind of how I would classify it. It's just another one of those great neutrals that I love. So I stamped that onto this watercolor paper with that ink. And after everything I was saying about like the texture and everything, funny enough that background stamp stamped way better than I thought it would onto this textured watercolor paper. So I'd stamped it. I taped down this background to a hardboard because I'm adding a ton of the watercolor, water, etc. So taping it down just helps keep everything from really curling and warping. So I just applied those same two colors. That's it. Just the green and the blue onto this with a big brush. And then I also added, of course, my other current obsession, the brilliant gold mica ink from Zig that I just love. And with the background, this was just me experimenting. I had kind of an idea in my head of what I wanted to do, but I'm just kind of playing around. So no rhyme or reason. I end up making a big mess of it, and I still went with it. So I've got my background. I've got, some splatters. I mostly dried it with my heat tool so I could add some splatters of the watercolor. And then I started channeling Debbie Hughes a bit on her recent videos. She did a more like kind of masculine card with the mixed media and all that stuff. And I was, as always, very inspired. And I was like, So it was in the back of my mind as I'm like creating this background and just sort of playing around and seeing what happens. So I've, stamped the background, added watercolor, added gold splatter, added watercolor splatter. I add more white splatter, let everything dry. And then I add some crackle paste. This was, again, an experiment. I was like, we'll just see what happens. So I just added crackle paste with a palette knife. I'm not like applying it over a stencil. So for me, this was definitely stepping out of the box a bit because I don't usually like freehand. You know what I mean? Like I would usually just apply it over a stencil, but I was just like, let's see what happens. So I applied it. You can let it air dry. I use my heat tool just to speed up the drying process. Even with a heat tool, you always want to make sure you keep your heat tool moving, regardless of whether you're embossing something or using it to dry things, all those things. Keep your heat tool moving. If you keep it just pointed at one spot, you are going to burn it. So I just kept it moving just to speed up the drying process so that the paste was completely dry. And then I took my palette knife and kind of scraped off a bit here and there. Again, this was inspired by Debbie Hughes. I would never think to do these things on my own. This is why I like watching other content creators and seeing how they make their cards and, pick up random little ideas. And same with the distress crayons. That's what Debbie used. And I was like, oh yeah, I have these and I haven't used them in how long? So I put a couple of distress crayons over this right now. Yeah, it looks like a mess. I, just scribbled them over the crackle paste, rubbed it in with my fingers, and then I just used my paintbrush to, remove the like streaky look of it because these are water reactive. And the whole point of that was to get that to settle into all the cracks and the crackles from that crackle paste, which you can see better in the photos. But again, I have these distress crayons. I bought them forever ago and I never really reached for them. So I need to more often because I like also, of course, that they're distressed so they match all the other colors. So I applied those crayons, added more splatter, gonna go back in, add more gold splatter. I was still at this point, I was like, this is a hot mess. But I was like, I'm gonna keep going because I knew, I'm going to put my flowers on top of it. Like this is literally the background. So I let it completely dry. I die cut it with one of Simon's basic rectangle wafer dies. And the florals I die cut with the coordinating wafer dies as well. So everything's die cut. I'm going to push that off to the side and work on the inside of my card. So my card base is just standard. It'll be a standard A2 top folding card. And I've masked off right where the score line is. And I'm going to ink up that thank you text background stamp with the fossil ink again. So I'm going to ink that up and then I'm going to stamp that on what will be the inside of this card. So flip that around, press that down into the stamp. That post-it tape is masking off right where the score line is so that there's no stamping past the score line of the card. And then I'm going to put this in my MISTI so that I can stamp that floral onto the inside of the card as well. So just kind of lined that up, or not even really lined it up. I just wanted to make sure I had enough space for the image. And that I'm inking up with Cracked Pistachio Distress Oxide ink. And stamp that, stamp like a dream. And then my favorite sentiment from this set that you like, well, you can tell these images are like, the stamps themselves are so stained. So line that up. That one I'm going to stamp with Mermaid Lagoon oxide ink, and I'm going to stamp that twice because it's a solid, like the sentiment has such solid areas. So I'm going to ink that up a couple times, stamp that, and then that completes the inside of the card. And yet again, this is sort of a thing you could do if you really wanted to do a more clean and simple-ish kind of card. That totally could have been a card front. So I let that all dry, reinforce that fold, and then I'm going to adhere that background piece with craft tacky glue to my card base. Once I've got this adhered, I'm gonna like stick it like under my MISTI and a couple little objects, because even with it being taped down, everything I did to it, it was still a little warped. So adhere that into place, set it aside under the weights, you know, to let everything dry. And then my sentiment is the Bold Thanks wafer die, which I've used in a bajillion videos. I die cut the white cardstock just from some scraps to give me some layers. And then the gold piece I die cut from my little Tonic 6x6 pack, and I'll have a link to that as well. I had thought about using Simon's matte gold cardstock for this. That would have been perfect too. But yeah, the 6x6 pack was sitting right beside me, and I was like, I'll use that. And then I pulled out a new roll of Simon's Big Mama foam tape. I thought I would show that. That's why it's called Big Mama. It is huge. Like a brand new roll of this stuff is massive. The actual tape itself is thin. You can kind of see it there, right on the screen there. It is about half as thick as your standard like Scotch foam tape, etc. That's why I like it. But it's called Big Mama because the roll is massive. And this is my, for sure, at least third, if not fourth roll now, since Simon started selling this stuff. I'm not even sure how many rolls I've gone through because, like, I make a lot of cards and I love it. Anyway, I tape my florals to my card base with just some Spellbinders tape. And then I had flipped over the card base and put lines with a pencil, and then flipped it back over and put lines with a pencil again, where the edge of the card is going to be. It doesn't have to be exact, but this just gave me a visual guide of where I want to apply the foam tape to the back of these. And then it also reminds me when I flip them back over, because I'll forget, where I want to adhere them. So then this way I don't have to add foam tape to areas that I don't need. And then I also don't have to cut through, you know, the layers of foam tape. So then once the foam tape's on there, peel off the backing. I used the pencil guides I just scribbled on the front to show me where I want to adhere this. And then once these are adhered, I can flip this card over and trim off all the parts that are hanging over. And like I said, I don't have to cut through layers of foam tape, etc. It's not the end of the world when you have to, but it's just kind of a pain in the butt, especially with like sticky, like this foam tape is sticky. So it just makes life easier. So then once those are adhered, I can adhere my die cut sentiment. And then off camera, I had gold heat embossed a little sentiment from that same Thankful Flowers set. And I gold heat embossed it onto just some black cardstock. Stacked a few layers of black cardstock under it. And then I'm going to pop that into place as well so that the card says thanks for everything. And then the inside says you couldn't be... What does the inside say? You couldn't be more awesome. My brain is mush today. Anyway. Got that adhered, and then of course I'm going to add bling. The Studio Cadia gold foil pearls that, like I've said this before, they don't leave my desk. They just sit on my desk because I use them all the time. So I sprinkled those, you know, throughout the card front, and then adhered those into place with dabs of craft tacky glue. And then I also pulled out a like mint green envelope from my stash. I was just going to use the envelope like as is, but then I was like, ooh, I have everything sitting out. So I put a piece of cardstock, just A2 size piece of cardstock inside the envelope before putting it in my MISTI. This just gives you a smoother surface to stamp on. So I've got that in there, lined that up in my MISTI with that floral image, and then I just inked it up with that cracked pistachio Distress Oxide ink. So just a little tone on tone, but you know, it just makes the whole card and matching envelope. So stamp that onto the envelope. I'll let that dry, and that completed this card. So I've got, you know, the nice little tone on tone envelope, and then I've got my card with that mixed media background where now you can see the crackle from those crayons that I put over the crackle paste, so it just settled into there. I got splatter, I got bling, I got gold cardstock. Life is great. My brain is mush, but life is great. So anyhow, as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. In my blog post, I will have a link and a graphic for the color throwdown challenge, so anyone who wants to play along can check it out. And then, of course, I will also link to all the supplies I used. All of that info will be in the description box below if any of you want to check it out. Thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all the good things. Very much appreciate it, and I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.